Greetings everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sitrep podcast, your forward operations base for all things military and historical wargaming. I am your host, Risky Jim, and today we are back at the miniatures table for another look at Anzio, part of the Italian campaign of World War II. The system we'll be using is Battlegroup by Iron Fist Publishing and Plastic Soldier Company, played in 15mm. Our scenario today will be based on an actual historical engagement that took place 80 years ago this week, part of the Breakout from the Anzio beachhead near the end of May 1944. Anzio is not a happy chapter for the Allies in World War II, especially for the Americans. The invasion had gone in at the end of January 1944. You'll notice that's about 4 months ago. The original idea was to put a corps of British and American divisions behind the German Gustav Line, further down the Italian peninsula, where they had the Allies helplessly stalled at places like Monte Cassino. And the less we say about that little bloodbath, the better. So the Anzio invasion goes in virtually unopposed, but then the American commander of 6th Corps, General John Lucas, more or less sits on his hands for, I'm not kidding here, about 9 days. The Germans couldn't believe their friggin' luck. Initially caught off balance by the Anzio landing, they had plenty of time to scramble together an operational response, and before Lucas got moving again, his beachhead at Anzio is now surrounded by 80 to 100,000 German reinforcements. Thus starts 4 miserable months at Anzio. We had, of course, General Lucas quickly relieved. We had the British engaged in some desperate rear guard defenses under attack by German Panzergrenadier Divisions. You may remember that community member Damon and I had that game back in early February on this channel. We had Ranger battalions taking 99% casualties in a single day. I'm not kidding about that figure. We had weeks of bombardment under what the Americans called Anzio Annie. This is one of the German railroad superguns. It was just a mess, and made worse by the fact that, honestly, none of it was really necessary. Finally, in May, Monte Cassino falls, the Gustav Line cracks, and now the main Allied line, made up of US 5th and the British 8th Army, starts moving forward. Yes, this means that the Anzio bridgehead is going to wind up being rescued by the Allied main line instead of the original plan, which was, of course, the other way around. By the last week of May, the Allied divisions in the Anzio bridgehead started their long-awaited breakout as well, and the Germans, being weakened by constantly drawing off forces back toward the Gustav Line, honestly couldn't really do much about it by this point. So today's game focuses on Combat Command A of the 1st U.S. Armor Division, Old Ironsides. Originally, they were committed against the northeast part of the perimeter, where they all but destroyed the German 362nd Infantry Division, but at the same time, they lost about 100 tanks on the first day of combat. Pulled out and refitted, they were then committed to the northwest, supporting an attack by the American 45th and 34th Infantry Divisions against Germans holding positions of the so-called Caesar Line. In this specific sector, we're talking about our old friends from the German 3rd Panzergrenadier Division. Both sides in this fight are beyond exhausted and well below establishment strength. We're going to see that in the orders of battle in today's game. The Americans are on the attack, pushing up the Albano Road. Their specific objective for today is where the Albano Road crosses the Campileone rail line. The Germans are just as determined to stop them because after this position, there's not a whole lot left behind them. It's going to be a straight shot up the Albano Road straight into Rome. So we have Devon playing the Germans on defense, and Jennifer B playing the Americans on the attack. Mark Ritchie is going to be joining us a little bit later as well. And finally, yours truly, Risky Jim, I'll be helping with some of the Americans as well. It was really a chaotic schedule for players in the club that day. But for now, let's go to the footage and see how our recreation of the Anzio Breakout goes down. Okay everybody, here is our map table for today's game. It's in 15mm and it measures about 6 feet wide by about 8.5 feet long, so it's about 51 square feet. We're looking out of the south into the north, and this road that you see heading straight down the middle of the table, this is the Albano Highway that leads straight into Rome. The Americans have to clear that road as well as the Campileone rail line that we see here. Here are some of the Germans already set up in defense. First up, we have some Panzerkampfwagen Mark IV. These are the Aufführung Gs without Schürzen, and some Stug 3s. Notice that all the little miniatures are numbered. because we are keeping track of tank ammunition per the full battle group rules in this scenario. We have a Flak 36 8.8 centimeter anti-aircraft gun, here of course using the anti-tank role. And for some real anti-aircraft work, we have a Sonderkraftzeuge 6/2 flak half-track right here. Here's the reason the Germans are going to be needing some of that anti-aircraft protection. We're looking at a P-38 Lightning that's almost certainly going to be making an appearance on today's table. Here comes some American ground forces. Specifically, these are Shermans of Combat Command A, 1st U.S. Armored Division. If you want to get really specific, we're talking about Able Company, 3rd Battalion of the 1st Armored Regiment. We also see the Forward Air Controller. You see him right there, FAC. He's going to help coordinate the missions for that P-38 Lightning. And over here around this corner of the table, we have some M7 howitzer motor carriages of Charlie Battery 33rd Field Artillery Battalion. So the Americans have some onboard direct fire artillery available. There's also a T-30 75mm howitzer on a half-track that is part of the infantry platoon's support options. Okay, so here's one last look at the table before we start checking dice. You can see where the Germans are set up in defense. Basically, they had to set up in their first 2 feet of the table first, the Americans then set up in their first 2 feet of the table second, and then the Americans, as the attackers, will be moving first. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to roll to see who is out-scouted. Normally in Battlegroup, this is determined by reconnaissance units. Here, both sides have advantages. The Germans own the ground and have spotters. The Americans have air superiority. The Germans have won the roll, so the Americans will begin out-scouted, and they'll be drawing the day's first battle rating counter. The Americans will start off with an artillery fire mission. Their observer is there in the tower of that little schoolhouse. Apparently there was a trigonometry book laying around. He picked it up, used it, and called it a perfect fire mission there on that German 88. There's the gun that's going to be executing the strike. It looks like number 22 of Charlie Battery, again 33rd Field Artillery Battalion. And yeah, perfect fire mission. First she rolled a 6 to see how many dice she had to roll for variance. Then she rolled a 1. It's only going to miss by 1 inch. As you can see, the base of that 88 isn't more than 1 inch in any direction. So long story short, take your first shot. That round landed right in the pickle barrel. However, then they didn't do very well on their pinning effects. They didn't score any killing attacks, and then the Germans did very well on their morale checks. So, at the end of the day, although the rounds landed right where they were supposed to, they wound up doing not very much damage, and the German gun crew is standing tall. We're now into the German turn. The American turn was almost all movement, predictably, and now we have that German 75mm anti-tank gun trying to target this American half-track behind the fence. The first thing that the German player has to do is observe, because your little plastic tanks do not have the God's eye view of the table that you do. So to observe a vehicle that is obscured but hasn't fired, looks like he needs a 3-up on a D6. So does Devin make the roll? Yes, he does, barely. Alright, so we do have an acquired target. He's going to go ahead and take an open fire order, which means he gets to shoot twice. So we've measured the range. It's between 30 and 40 inches. An AP shell is 5+ on a D6. Now he is obscured. There's some wheat fields in the way. There's a fence in the way. So we're going to go ahead, and some road berms. So we're going to go ahead and make it a 6. Long story short, take your second shot. He's going to have to make a 6. However, he does get 2 shots with a 2 and a 4. However, those are faces. The German 88 is now going to open fire. Believe it or not, when the American M7 howitzer motor carriages started dropping 105 HE frag on them, it kind of pissed them off. So they don't like that. They're going to send an 88mm shell back at the American howitzer motor carriage, and with a 6, yeah, that's a hit in anyone's book. Then comes the penetration, an 88mm shell at this range versus the front of an M7. Yeah, we figured it out. Turns out Devin needs to roll a 3-up on 2 D6. So, long story short, take your third shot. That was the end of that M7 howitzer motor carriage. beginning American turn 2, and the first thing you do in these battle group turns is you roll your command dice. The number of command dice depends on the size of the game. In this game we're rolling 3 dice. You also add the number of officers that you have left. So the Americans have 5 officers, they get to add 5 to that roll. Now the Americans have paid for another special rule that they have in this scenario, Superior American Communication Network, i.e. their radios. So once per turn, the Americans can take one of their command dice and re-roll it. The Germans can only do this once a game, but Americans have access to this rule if they want to pay for it. They can actually re-roll their worst orders dice every single turn. So Mark's going to go ahead and re-roll it, and yeah, suffice it to say, the Americans have plenty of orders. They're going to have more than enough to move all of their units this turn. So the American tanks here along this eastern road, they moved up in turn 1 of the double move order. Now in turn 2, they've been opening fire on these responding German Stugs. Quite a few misses. They had one failed observation roll. They're partially blinded by their own smoke screens there. Also some wheat fields and some ruins in the way. Now Mark is going to activate that M10 tank destroyer from Delta Battery, 701st Tank Destroyer Battalion, and he is going to target the Stug. So he goes to roll observation. He takes an open fire order, which means he gets 2 shots, but he fails his first observation check. So now he only gets to take 1 shot if he makes his second observation check, which he has. That 5 is a hit. So now we're going to try and get some penetration. He needs to get a 7 or more on 2d6. And with an 8, he barely gets it. So boom, that is going to be an M10 tank destroyer penetrating that Stug. Alright, that Stug is now burning and on fire. Pretty much the only American tank that could get through that armor. American M3 half-track has now moved up behind this church, and Jennifer B is going to try to spot this German command squad here. Oops, that little guy isn't dead yet. Ooh, that's your platoon leader there. Be careful. You see that little red dot on his base? Try not to lose that figure, Mr. Devon. Alright, so now Jennifer tries to observe. She has made the observation check. Because she moves, she gets a single fire order only with that Mauldus 50 cal there. So pencil mount machine guns get a rate of fire of 5. They get to roll 5 dice. We measure the range. Looks like she's going to have to get a 5+ in order to score a hit on her 5 dice. So she rolls her 5 dice. Looks like she scored 2 hits with a 5 and a 6. Now we go to the cover save table, because the Germans do have some cover. It's considered soft cover because of hedges and so on. So for each of those hits, they get to roll a save. Looks like Devon's going to be looking for 5+. So Devon rolled 2 dice, and again, you're looking for 5 ups. Did manage to save 1, so only 1 German figure is knocked down. Alright, now that unit has taken some losses, we do have to take a unit experience test to see if the remainder are pinned down. You see there with the 4, they did make their unit quality test, so besides that casualty, the rest of the unit is not pinned and they're okay. Spoiler alert, if that M3 half-track had not had to move, it could take a double fire order. That's 10 D6 coming at you. Americans love their 50 cals. You get a whole bunch of half-tracks or 50 cals, they're all taking double fire orders. That's a lot of lead coming your way. Be on the lookout for that. Now beginning German turn 2, and it looks like one of the first moves the Germans took was to move forward with this Mark IV and try to engage that M3 half-track by the church. Fortunately for the Americans, the Germans missed because that 75 at that close range wouldn't have left much of that M3 half-track for sure. Now that Stug has moved forward, he's going to go ahead and try to engage Mark's M10 tank destroyer. No observation roll is needed because it's a vehicle that has fired at you in the open. It's pretty much automatic at that point. But now he has to hit, and you see where he rolled a 5. We've measured the range, we've applied all the modifiers, and because the Stug had to move, the 5 was a miss. Meanwhile, the other vehicles that Devon has that were already in that crossroads, those Mark IVs, that didn't have to move, they only need a 5. Unfortunately now, Devon rolls a 4. So, bad luck for the Germans, good luck for the Americans. By the way, I should note that when Jennifer B set up her tanks where she did over there on the American right, it really kind of crowbarred the German 88 and even that 75 kind of out of the battle. And And what's happening now is the Germans have to move their tanks. They're on defense, and yet they're having to move their tanks to engage the Americans, which more or less negates the Germans' defensive advantage. Now Devon has to roll against an additional +1 difficulty, and this is why he's missing a lot of his key shots. Into American turn 3, and they're advancing by fires with all those tanks over there on their right wing, so they're taking a lot of move and fire orders, which means that they are missing a lot of shots, especially since the Germans are considered obscured. They get the +1 bonus for being behind those road berms, but that's okay, the Americans have plenty of tanks. Now Mark is going to try to open fire with his M10 tank destroyer. Again, observation is almost automatic. It would be, except the Germans again are considered obscured. They're kind of huddled down behind those road berms, so they do manage to observe. The chance to hit is a lot more difficult, however. Mark misses twice more. Be careful, guys, we are tracking ammunition in this game. Now the Americans are close enough with some of their infantry. We have a bazooka gunner. There he is. He's inside the ruins of that building. I'm not worried about backblast. There's no roof on those ruins, so it's fine. He has now scored a hit on that Stug. Alright, cool. Now the tough part, to get through the armor. She needs to roll a 9 or better on 2d6. She gets exactly 9. So if you exactly tie the penetration number, the vehicle is not considered destroyed. However, it is considered pinned. And on the morale check, they almost bail. There's a nasty little firefight right here by this church. I wish I got more of it on camera, but there was too much going on. I had to resolve at the time. So here's the story. This American armored infantry squad is actually in that church. Now, those Germans behind the hedge were on what's called ambush fire. It's kind of like an opportunity fire posture. So when the Americans moved into the church, the Germans opened fire, knocked down a couple Americans. After saves, 1 American had been lost. The Americans then returned fire, and as you can see, they knocked down most of the Germans. There's only 4 of them left. So 1 American down, 3 Germans down. The Americans are definitely winning this little firefight for sure. Be especially careful, again, of that figure with the little red dot on his base. That is Herr Leutnant. That is your German Panzergrenadier platoon leader. But now Jennifer B is going to take a double fire order from that Maudeuse on that half track. First she has to observe, and she actually fails the first observation check. No worries, she makes the second one. The difference now being that with that first failed observation check, she only gets to shoot once. So that's going to be 5d6. Looks like she scored 2 hits. Okay, Devon is not available at the moment, so I'll quickly roll his 2 saves. Okay, saved for 1, so that is going to be 1 German knocked down. Time to make a morale check, and I made the troop quality test. The saga of the church continues. The Americans are going to drop a 60mm mortar barrage from their company mortars. They were aiming for the tank, but that's where the shells actually landed. You'll notice they're equally distant between the tank and their own troops there in the church. Failed to pin down the tank, and then the one time Jennifer B rolls well on her artillery effects, it's to pin down her own infantry squad in the church. Meanwhile, on the American right, the tank battle continues. Both sides more or less have their vehicles in position. No one's moving and firing, so no one is shooting against that additional +1 difficulty. However, both sides are kind of obscured by either road berms or wheat fields. So now it's a straight out shooting match, and here's where numbers are going to count. The Americans just landed another shot on that upper Mark IV that you see there, and then they score snake eyes for penetration. So that means that Mark IV is immobilized. After another shot, actually after another 2 shots, that Mark IV winds up taking 3 shots in all. One was an immobilization shot, and then it was penetrated twice. So yeah, that Mark IV is now out of gas. Wrapping up the American turn, Mark is going to fire some of his last Shermans at that Stug. Trust me, I think he would rather target the Mark IV that's behind the Stug. The Mark IV has rather thinner armor, but the Stug is blocking line of sight on a lot of these shots. Even if Mark can't get through the armor on the Stug, if he can keep it pinned, it's been pinned for a while now, he'll eventually force the crew to abandon. Now we're into the German turn, and the first German fire is going to come back at those same Shermans that are in the wheat field. The Americans are considered obscured targets that have fired at you because they're in the wheat field, so that's going to make it like a 2+ to observe. The Germans easily make that. Now he's going to take his double fire order. He scores 1 hit on the American Sherman, and now needs to roll pretty easy, a 6 or better, but he only gets a 4, those 2 black dice. Okay, so the Sherman is not penetrated, and then the Americans also roll well on the unit morale table. That crew stands tall. German turn 3 continues. Meanwhile, how about we get some footage from the other side of the table for a change? Alright, so heading around the north end of the table and coming to the eastern side, we see some German anti-tank and infantry positions, and again, this tank duel that continues to develop here in the center. And the Germans are not doing well here, I'm not going to lie. They've got basically only 2 tanks or tank destroyers up against 7 American tanks and a tank destroyer. That means that they're outnumbered 4-1, and even worse, that German Stug is pinned down, so not great news for the Germans. One of the reasons the Germans are short is 2 of their tanks are over here engaging the Americans by the church for some reason. But meanwhile, we have this Panzergrenadier squad. Yes, a 1944 German Panzergrenadier squad is that small. However, they do have MG34 upgrades. You see those 2 little figures there with the bipod machine gun. And we're going to fire all of that up at the Americans in the church, assuming the Germans can make their observation check. Which, quickly checking with the German player here, yes, they do make the 3+ to observe. Just quickly checking, yes, obscured infantry firing at you. There it is. Okay, cool. He's made the observation check. Now we're going to count up the German dice, and yeah, spoiler alert, it gets scary fast, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus 5 more makes 10, plus 5 more makes 15. Yes, those are 2 MG34s, 1 with the infantry squad, 1 on the back of the half-track. So that's 15 dice. And by the way, we're going to make a quick correction when we remember that the German MG34 on the back of the half-track didn't move. So he can take a double fire order. 20 D6s against the Americans. It's a pretty easy chance to hit too. The only good grace for the Americans is that they're going to get pretty good saves. They're inside a stone church. So, the Americans have suffered 11 hits. However, they are in reinforced cover, so they get a 3+ to save. Jennifer B is going to roll 11 save dice. She's looking for 3-ups. Basically, only 1 German hit in 3 is going to count. But again, they started off with 11 hits. So we wait for her to complete all of her saves, and we got 7 saves, so that's going to be 4 American casualties. Okay, beginning American turn 4, we have completed the order phase. We've rolled 3d6, added 5, we know how many orders the Americans get. Now we're going to try to yet again bring in this P-38, which has failed the entire game so far. Hey, and with a 4, Jennifer B finally makes her forward air controller check, and that P-38 is going to be available for the Americans this turn. That's going to cost 1 order for the forward air controller, 1 for the plane itself, 2 orders total whenever the Americans choose. But for now, the Americans are going to begin with some ground movement. Looks like a armored infantry squad is going to occupy those ruins. No worries there. And then further to the east, Mark has had to leave for the day, leaving me in command of the American right. No worries though, because he's left me in a really nice position. None of my Shermans really have to move. They can all take double fire orders. I've got 5 online in all. I just have to start making observation checks, and hopefully I can knock out both that Stug and maybe even that last Mark IV. Alright, so A21 makes it, A22 makes it, A23. Holy crap, I'm using up all my good die rolls here. Okay, first platoon, they start making their rolls. A11 makes it. Good grief. Look at all these 6s. I'm going to need these 6s later when it comes time to actually hit. Especially since, yes, we are tracking ammunition again. You see where we have H for high explosive, A for armor piercing. After this salvo, some of my tanks are going to be out. This is my last big swing. Alright, so we're burning up some of our last AP ammunition here. Okay, that's going to be 1 hit there on the first tank. That's going to be misses on the second tank. Tank number 3, 2 more misses. Okay, that's going to be 1 more hit on the 4th tank, and now the 5th and final tank is going to get a hit. That's 3 total hits. Alright, so the first one is going to be applied against the Mark IV. So, Boom! That is an easy penetration. That German Mark IV is now burning out of fire. That was the easy one. Now I got to get through the Stug, which has thicker frontal armor. Okay, I need a 9 or better to penetrate, so that one definitely doesn't do it. That one is exactly a 9. That's going to force a pin. And then he rolls a 1 on his unit quality check. So, awesome. I got hella lucky there. I'm not going to lie. Because that Stug was already pinned from earlier fire, then I forced another pinning check by rolling exactly a 9 on the penetration dice. That is going to force an abandoned. Notice that abandoned has that little 1 notation next to it. You go down to the notes. It only counts as abandoned if it was already pinned, which it technically was. That Stug is now considered abandoned. The crew kind of destroys the vehicle as they bail out, so it doesn't get captured. That's going to be a wrecked German Stug and the end of the German center. I think I've done enough damage for now. Time to let Jennifer B bring in her P-38 Lightning and see what she can do. First, she has to roll to see what kind of ordnance package the plane is carrying. That's either going to be an anti-infantry load of 1 medium and 2 small bombs, or an anti-tank load of 10 5-inch rockets. She rolls for the 10 5-inch rockets, so now we can choose what kind of target she wants to go after. She's going after those 2 tanks that are trying to overrun the Americans at the church. Problem is, there is a German 3.7 centimeter autocannon flak unit. Oh, gotta fix my poor horse there. Ready to shoot down the P-38. So come back next week when we resolve this anti-aircraft fire and we see what this airstrike can get done on the ground. There we are so far, folks. There's been a little bit of confusion on the American side, but that's just because we've had to hand off command of part of the army to various players as the day wore on. But I'll tell you this much, Jennifer B's decision to place most of the American armor where she did over there on the American right wing was pretty awesome. This is before Mark showed up at the club that day and definitely before I was playing. So that decision was all hers, and it was actually kind of brilliant. It more or less crowbarred the German 88 and even to a certain extent that 75 completely out of the battle. And what it wound up doing was it forced Devon to redeploy and commit his armor against us. This completely negated what was supposed to be the German defensive advantage. In a way, he had to send his tanks out against us instead of our tanks being sent against him, and it's made a big difference as you've seen so far. Mark then took command of the American tanks on the right wing, and as we saw in the video, executed a great advance against fires, balancing his movement and his fire, putting down just enough fire to keep the Germans pinned to a certain extent, while maintaining a decent pace of advance. We also saw where that American M10 tank destroyer was really the only unit that stood a reasonable chance of putting a hole in those Stugs, especially along their frontal armor, which of course Mark identified and used correctly, the right tool for the right job. Then Mark had to leave for the day, and I took over the American right, and you saw in the video where I basically blew the German center clean off the table, but honestly I don't deserve most of the credit for that. That was Jennifer's deployment and Mark's movement that put me in that beautiful position where I could execute that attack. So come back next week when we see if the Americans can make the most of the fair fortune that we've seen in today's episode. But yeah, this fight isn't over, and spoiler alert, the Germans have some nasty surprises waiting for us. But that's where we're going to leave it for today, folks. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Please remember to hit that notification bell. Also, please consider joining the Sitrep Podcast Discord. There's an auto-accept invitation link to our Discord in the description of this video. Join our community, see what everybody's up to, and best of all, show us what's happening on your hobby table. But for now, this is Risky Jim with the Sitrep Podcast. We are rounds complete for another episode. And as always, Tango Mike for watching.